So, bonjour, greetings, hello, welcome to the Philosophy Club here in sleepy La Creuse, this heart of old Gaul and modern France. It's the least populated region in France, actually, which is why it's surrounded by beautiful trees and hills and landscapes, and I love it here. It's very peaceful. It reminds me of rural Wales in Powys, where I used to live, and also in Scotland. So it's very Celtic feel to it, and it's a good centre to do this kind of work for peace and applied philosophy, which is the point of this philosophy club. So let me start as usual by welcoming people and sharing something of what I've been up to this week. It's always a interesting crisis we're living through, isn't it, because of this war that's going on in Gaza and the one in Ukraine. And the world's political and secular authorities don't seem to know what to do about it all. They're watching in slow time this catastrophe unfold. So I've been doing my bit this last week. I was involved in a meeting on Friday of the Wisdom Keepers Council, which I've been involved with for some time now with my friend Satyen Raja in Canada and assorted other peace thinkers, spiritual elders. We're a motley crew mostly from North America, but a few from abroad, and also from shamanic traditions in Peru and elsewhere, and some First Nations peoples from Canada. So I take part in that normally once a month, and we have a different topic, and we're hoping to publish a book about this work. It's quite pioneering about what wisdom can do for the contemporary problems of the planet, and how can we develop that. So we were discussing early years childhood and early education and how important that is in parenting, and if children don't grow up with love, then it creates a knock-on effect of angst. And if you look at the role of leaders around the planet, people like Putin and Hitler and others, often they're the victims themselves. They've never had proper love when they were growing up. They don't know what it is, so therefore they don't understand its language. So that's why it's so important, parenting. Anyway, we discussed that at length. I also want to report that a dear friend of mine tragically has died this week. Lilian Brzozowska, who was a Polish-Scottish peace activist, amazing woman who I had the pleasure to meet several times. She came to my castle in Scotland for meetings and discussions. And she was somebody I interviewed in 2011 after I moved to the Castle of the Muses in Scotland. So I've put that on my Facebook page. The interview I did with her about her work for peace. She was a believer that Scotland could or should get rid of nuclear weapons from its soil, and this would help a sort of knock-on effect for global denuclearization. I see that around the world, many countries have declared they'll never develop nuclear weapons, and there's a mass movement now to get them declared illegal, and for everyone to sign up and get rid of them. And of course, the UK hasn't, and nor has France, and nor has America, nor Russia, nor China, nor India, or Pakistan, or Israel. So there's this problem, this small group of nations who have collectively vast amounts of power and wealth and investing in nuclear weapons. So anyway, in the interview with Lillian, I asked, what do we do about this? How can we draw on some sort of spiritual resources to convince people that they don't need these weapons of mass destruction for their own security? I mean, Switzerland doesn't have them, Norway doesn't have them. Most countries around the world don't have them. It seems to me it's a throwback to the tragedy of World War II. They were only developed because everyone thought the Nazis were getting them. So the Americans thought, well, we better get them first. The Manhattan Project created them. And it turned out, no, the Nazis hadn't weren't getting them. They hadn't got a clue how to get them. And it's one of those things that, having invented them, how do we get rid of them? Then the Russians stole the technology through its intelligence agents under Stalin and copied them and created its own, and then gave them to the Chinese, and the Chinese got them under Mao. Israel got them, France got them. So now we've got, a very dangerous situation on the planet. So anyway, I talked to Lillian about all this in my interview. She was someone that believed in peace as a lived experience, that you can't, it's not just for diplomats organising conferences, it's for you and me and everyone. And it's a spiritual accessing of peace within. She was a co-counsellor. She believed in the therapeutic process, which could be shared. Interestingly, her father was Polish, who had fled to Scotland during the war and married a Scottish woman. And so she was mixed, Polish, Scottish, and brought up a Catholic. She was very Christian in the deepest possible sense of the word, I think. She believed in love is the redemptive force against violence. And anyway, amazing woman, and tragically she died. She wasn't that old, so it's very, very sad when people of such wisdom depart. And she was also very interested in the bardic tradition, the Druids and the Celtic world. She was herself a bard, a poet. She could improvise poetry and music. We did some great improvisations together when she came to the castle. We had some great nights of celebrating with friends, making music and poetry and song. So we'll miss her, but her work lives on, okay, in all the people's lives she touched. That leads me to share something else I've been doing this week, which is my dear friend Dr. Sean English, who's one of Ireland's leading academic experts in peace studies, has launched a project to revive a very important initiative taken by a great Irish Christian saint, a Domnan, who was the abbot of Iona in Scotland, where Lillian went many times. I've been to Iona many times. It's one of the holiest places in Europe, I would say. It's where St. Columba founded his great monastery. When he left Ireland, he went to Iona on the shores of Scotland. And it was like a spiritual sanctuary, a centre for thinking, writing, praying, spiritual work. I've been there several times. I've read the biography of Columba by a Domnan, who was the 8th abbot after him. So he never met Columba, but he knew people who knew people who knew him. And he wrote down what Columba had done, which was interesting. Among the many stories in a Domnan's book, I'll share just one, which is there's a hill in the middle of Iona, which is a small little island. It's only like 3 or 4 miles long by about 1.5 miles wide. Very, very, very beautiful. And the monastery is in one part, and you can walk around the whole thing in a day easily. But it's exquisite landscape, and Columba used to go out at nights, and nobody quite knew where he went. He would sometimes just leave the monastery and go for a walk. And one day, a younger monk, followed him just to see where he went. And he saw that he went onto this hill in the middle of the island and sat there meditating. It was like after midnight, it was very dark. And as he watched from a distance behind a stone, he saw angels ascending and descending and like conversing with Columba. This is what is reported in the story. And when Columba was walking back down from the hill towards the monastery, the monk said, what's going on here? What are all these strange lights in the sky and these strange beings that I could see? Anyway, Columba swore him to secrecy and said, hush, don't tell anyone what you saw, it's private, don't follow me again, I'm just doing God's work here. Anyway, that story got into the book of the Domnans, and I went to that hill actually, and I meditated there and sat there. I didn't see any physical angels appearing, but I think to me an angel is a state of being I think there are still angels around on Iona in that spiritual sense. And there's a monastery, the Abbey community is still going, they've revived it. It was refounded by a visionary Christian socialist peace activist from Glasgow in the 1920s, I think. And they built it. And so now it's a thriving community. People can go and stay there and work and live there. And it has a book publishing house. It has wonderful facilities and a beautiful abbey where they do evensong. And they developed their own kind of style of singing music. I've been to services there. So anyway, Adomnan, this abbot who wrote the life story of Columba, he was very upset because in his day, in the 8th century in Ireland, the tribes were all fighting each other all the time. Celtic warriors are always pretty strong and fierce, and they were all having battles and fighting each other. And often the women and children were being killed, either deliberately in sort of crimes or just collateral damage or whatever. And he had this vision whereby that was absolutely not on. And he had what's called an Aisling dream, which is a tradition in the Irish, both Druid and Christian tradition, where you have a visionary dream and a spirit comes to you in a female form and brings a message. And the message came to him that he had to stop all this killing of women and children. And so he, because as Abbot of Iona, he had quite a lot of clout, both in Scotland and Ireland. He organised a big conference in Birr, B-I-R-R, in the centre of France. Centre of Ireland. And he got all the tribal leaders to come, the chieftains, the little kings, and to swear what's called the law of the innocents, lex innocentium in Latin, that they would preserve and protect and defend women and children. They would never kill them outright. They would make sure they were, not harmed, even though if they were going to war, they would protect the innocents. And this was then promulgated throughout Ireland, and it was observed. And it was the first legislation in European history whereby this was made official. So innocents, women and children, and non-combatants were not to be harmed. I mean, it seems incredible that it took till the 8th century to get a law to that effect, but that's what it did. Anyway, this law then lasted for, it's never been rescinded, it's part of Irish law. And later in Gaul, a similar idea came up in France when the great monastic traditions of Cluny and so on promulgated a similar idea. There'd be no fighting on a Friday anywhere in Gaul. I think Friday and Saturday were declared off limits. People should have a chance to, rest and not have battles and so on. And it sort of blended into that. So the idea is, what my friend Sean English is doing with a group of Irish peace activists is reissuing the Lex Innocentium in modern language. Because obviously what we're witnessing around the world is we seem to have forgotten this law. Not just in Gaza, but in Ukraine and in other contemporary wars that have been going on. The innocents are being mass slaughtered. And it was true in World War II with Nagasaki and Hiroshima and the bombing of Dresden and Hamburg. Modern war is brutal. Because of our huge technological advantages, generals can now, at a push of a button, kill innocents. And they're doing it. So what the Irish peace friends of mine are saying is enough is enough. We have to bring back Adomnan's visionary law, repromulgate it. So they're going to be having an online launch and a launch in Ireland near to Birr, where it took place, on September the 21st this year. So I'm inviting people, this is a little advance notice, please either come to Ireland or join us online to re-establish this law of the innocents. Because Ireland, as a neutral country, doesn't want to see yet more violence and bloodshed in the world, particularly for innocent women and children. I mean, it's scandalous, this. It just symbolises that we need to reactivate our moral education. So I've been helping with that. I've been involved, as I said before, with the international independent panel that's monitoring the Indian elections to make sure they're fair. We've been having various online meetings. And it's a problem with a huge democracy like India, which is going to the polls now. It's a 3-week election period, but there's very little confidence that the electronic voting machines they're using are not able to be hacked and tampered with by the ruling government, which has been misusing its powers, and these are objective facts I'm saying, by arresting opposition leaders, by putting them in prison, by silencing people, and by creating a sort of climate of fear. You know, you've got to vote for us, or look what can happen to you. This isn't democracy. This is, one of my colleagues online coined the phrase, this is an elected autocracy, or it's a hybrid democracy. It's got features of democracy. Yeah, you can have a vote, but just vote for us. That's not democracy. That's going in the direction of Putinism, which is not, I think India is too precious and wonderful and beautiful a nation to let that happen to it. You know, I've travelled all over the country, and I've spent many happy days in its various libraries, including the National Library in Calcutta, which I love. And yeah, it's too intelligent a nation to allow this madness to take over. This idea that democracy is fine as long as you vote for the majority, which is the Hindutva type of way of thinking. But actually India is much deeper and broader than that. It has many Sikhs, it has many Muslims, it has many Zoroastrians, it has many Jews, it has Baha'is. I've been to the Baha'i temple in Delhi. It has many Christians. The wealth of India is its spiritual strength. It has many millions of Jains, who I know and respect very much. The real India is all of these together, living in harmony. And the true Hindus know that, and they celebrate that. What we have is a sort of mob Hinduism, like you get in all religions. You get the primitive, simplistic view, which is, you know, it's got as much in common with authentic Hinduism, the Modi style, as the Appalachian Mountain kind of Ku Klux Klan had with Christianity. They call themselves Christians, but they were sheer racists, and they were prepared to, you know, murder and terrorize the blacks who were regarded as inferior beings. I mean, that's not Christianity, and yet they called it Christianity. So I think that's where we're at with India, sadly to say. And I'm doing my bit as an intellectual to monitor that. So I also attended the Goddess Conference, run from Glastonbury this week. My dear friends in Glastonbury love their goddess, and they have an annual conference. We were talking, you know, online. It was a panel of people speaking about, you know, who is the goddess. As a philosopher, I'm a lover of Sophia, the goddess of wisdom. So of course I'm a goddess worshipper, but the question is, what kind of goddess are we going to worship? Some are maybe not to be worshipped. I mean, some of the fanatics worship a kind of a dark goddess that Kali used to want human sacrifice, for instance, in India. And there were devotees of the goddess would go around doing human sacrifices, up until the British abolished it. One of the things I don't like about the Modi form of RSS Hinduism is they're very, very anti-British. Well, I know from history, as a historian, the British actually did quite a lot for India. I know we made terrible mistakes, but you know, one of the things we did was abolish human sacrifice and sati and other kinds of things. You know, so yes, I hope India doesn't slip back into that kind of madness. So yes, goddess worship, but yeah, you know, mind your goddess is all I would say there. Also this week, on the 15th of April, a lot happened. It was the birth anniversary of Leonardo da Vinci, who we celebrated here at a big conference a few years ago, and he's buried up at Amboise, not far from here, which gave me the idea for the Nonagon, building that on top of the Pentagon, as a 9-sided building devoted to peace. And I'm a great fan of Leonardo. It's also the birthday of Guru Nanak, the same day. And I've been listening to the 50 hours talking book of his great epic, the Guru Granth Sahib, this great it's the Sikhs' Bible, and he contributed a lot of the poetry, but so did all the other gurus, the 10 gurus. And if you haven't ever listened to the whole thing or read the whole thing, I recommend it. It's brilliant. I don't agree with everything it says. I mean, there are some things that I think are dated culturally. At one point, the poem says, if you die and you're thinking of your daughter, you will come back for 53 million incarnations in hell. The idea is that you've got to think about good things and heavenly things, and you can't think about your children, for instance, because, that's attachment to the world. Well, sorry, I don't agree with that. I have 3 beautiful daughters, and I think that's just over the top. That's hyperbole, and I get the point that the Guru Granth Sahib is making, which is when you're dying, you should think about heavenly things. But I think to think about one's children is a good thing too, and in fact, ideally, they should be with you when you're dying. So there are little bits like that I don't quite agree with, but then. And so far as I know, nobody's ever done a whole study of the Guru Granth Sahib, a critical line-by-line commentary. If I live long enough, I'd love to do it, because many passages are sublime, and it's very much influenced by Sufi poetry. But there are some passages that I think need updating. So forgive me, my dear Sikh friends. I say the same about the Bible, the New Testament. I'm a philosopher, right? And then also, talking of philosophers, on that same day, the 15th of April, Sartre died, my dear old philosophy colleague, and it was one of the greatest funerals in France. I think 100,000 people turned out for the funeral. He was trying to think through what is truth, what is reality, without having to go to the gods, using philosophy, pure philosophy. So I admire his work. And he was very important in the whole school of existentialism after the war. And I've written this book, Being and Knowledge, kind of updating his book on being and nothingness. As a philosopher, I think the real conversation to have is the dialectic between being and knowledge. That's the one for our time, especially in the world of AI, science, etc., etc. Well, what do we do about knowledge? And especially now, because knowledge is becoming like a minefield. How do we know what people say is true? How do we know if that's actually Thomas here? I could be a deep fake saying all this. I could be an AI robot. How do you know? So I think we need to really get our thinking caps on and work out what kind of knowledge we want, what kind of knowledge brings salvation, and what kind of knowledge brings truth. So that's what I've addressed in my book, Being and Knowledge, which is a kind of homage to Sartre and Heidegger and Aristotle, who began the whole conversation about being. He defined metaphysics as the study of being. And then just to say, so the other thing I want to share is I'm also working on a book at the moment, another book. I'm always busy with writing. And I'm working on a book called The 99 Names of Peace. And I'm going into 99 languages of the planet, sharing what their word for peace is. I'm going deep into the etymology of it and the history of that language. And then I'm marrying it up with a project of to do with peace. And this week I've done, I'm doing one a day, but just recently I've done Urdu. Urdu is a fascinating language. It's from what is called Pakistan now. And what's so extraordinary is Urdu is basically the same language as Hindi. If you speak Hindi and you speak Urdu, you can understand each other. It is the same language. And it grew out of the descendants of the traditional Indian languages like Sanskrit, and how they were spoken from like 1500 onwards. And the only difference is that Urdu keeps a lot of the Persian words that the Mughals brought into India, and they write with the Persian alphabet, which is going ultimately back to Arabic, the writing script they use. So they look different. If you look at a word of Urdu, or a page of Urdu writing, it looks like Arabic. And if you look at a page of Hindi, it looks like Sanskrit, because they use the Devanagari alphabet. But actually they're the same language, which is why the tragic split between Pakistan and India is so silly. and why I'm so against the demonization of India's Muslim community. I think they're amazing, great philosophers, Sufis, saints, and they brought much to India's civilization that was of great value. I mean, yes, of course there were thugs, there were people that burned the libraries of the Buddhists, there were ignorant Muslims. Tragically, you get them in every religion. But I don't think their contributions should be overlooked. They contribute a lot to science in India and to medicine and to mathematics. Modern mathematics came with the sort of contribution of Indian maths to the Islamic intellectuals who then created algebra and what we regard as modern maths grew out of that marriage. So we should be celebrating each other's cultural achievements, I think. And anyway, the word for peace in Urdu is aman. And it goes back to the Arabic because it has the same meaning in Arabic, aman. And its origin is, I've looked up the etymology, I contacted the chief etymologist of Arabic at the University of Oslo. It has a meaning of firmness, security, safety, and truth. Aman is that which really exists. Aman is that which you can rely on. And it exists in all the Semitic languages, a root like that, in Hebrew, Old Akkadian, even in Ethiopian languages, and so on. And it's there in our word, Amen. When you finish a prayer and you say Amen, which was an Aramaic word that Jesus used, it means verily, truthfully. So it is. So be it. So Aman comes from a root, from the same root. And it's really saying that peace is that which truly is. When we abandon all the evil phantoms of our imagination or our false desires, as Buddha said, we come back to Aman, which is the truth, which is peace. So anyway, that was really interesting. And then today I've been looking at Zulu, the African language, which is a Bantu language. Fascinating language. I've been researching the etymology of Bantu, and it's not so well advanced as one would like. But what I've discovered is that the word for peace in Zulu is ukutla. And this comes from a root which means silence, holding one's peace, in the sense of experiencing and absorbing silence. And it's related to the word for hearing and listening. So the Zulu, who are very, very ancient people and have their sangomas, their medicine people, going right back to, thousands of years ago, know that peace is only possible when we listen to each other in silence. And then we can hear truthfully what's in somebody's heart. So I think that, again, I was exploring this etymology today of the word for peace in Zulu, and it's every day I learn new things about how human tribes and all our different cultures see peace. A few days ago I was working on the Mohawk language of North American Indians, and having been born in Canada, I was very interested and inspired to read that the word Canada comes from Mohawk, and it meant to town in Mohawk. So does the word Ontario, which I know and love, although I was born in Quebec, and also many other Canadian words are actually Mohawk words. So I was very disturbed when I read that in Montreal now there's a whole load of homeless Canadian Indians living downtown on the streets, congregating around a particular park. I read this in an article in Liberation, which is a French newspaper, very good, a bit like The Guardian. And it was sad to me to read that my brothers and sisters, Canadian Indians, are out homeless on the street and they're dying because of the cold weather. We've got to do something about this, this is not acceptable. So I've written to people, I'm hoping that we can get some Yeah, I mean, this is not fair on the indigenous Canadian Indians, whose land it is that Europeans came and settled, starting with the French and then the English. And we owe it at least to them to make sure they have homes and you know, a life of dignity and self-respect and all the rest of it. So that's just something, and therefore I was minded doing the words in the Iroquois language. Mohawk is an Iroquois language. And my intellectual hero in ancient Canadian thought, Deganawida, who I was talking about, is the peace elder of the Indian cultures of North America. And he brought what's called the Great Law of Peace. He was there, he was active long before the whites appeared in Canada or North America. And if you haven't heard of him, Deganawida, look him up. He was like the Moses of the Canadian and American Indians, who brought from the spirit world this teaching about peace. And that led to the founding of the Six Nations. The Iroquois tribes came together and buried the hatchet. And they created a structure that in future conflicts they would have them mediated and arbitrated by a council of elders. And so no tribe could go to war against another tribe. It would go to the council. He set all that up in place, and when the Europeans came and lived there, they discovered this and became friendly with the Iroquois. And this inspired the ideas behind the American Constitution, the idea of a federal structure where all the different states would coexist in harmony. And Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson actually met the Iroquois elders and learned how it worked. They pass the peace pipe round, they pray first before making a council decision, and then they use a talking stick so that everybody talks and listens. The key to peace is listening. And it also inspired the founding of the United Nations, because the founders of the UN thought we should have a similar thing for all the world's tribes, which would resolve the conflicts. So we need to remember the wisdom of Deganawida, in my opinion, my fellow Canadian, and restore that principle of consensus building through going to spirit, ultimately, is what the Canadian Indian way was, and the American Indian way, because in those days there was no Canada and America, it was all one people that spilled over the two borders. So that's what I've been up to this week, and I'm just sharing this because obviously my mediation initiative, I've written to the UN Secretary General. Really, I'm saying to him, look, wake up here. We've got a crisis going on in Gaza. We can't let this mass murder go on. And the Israelis are so upset. They've got their own narrative story of pain and revenge, and Palestinians are utterly traumatized. So, Deganawida and that lineage is saying enough is enough is enough. We've got to put this to the Planetary Council, and I'm very happy to go there and mediate, although I'm suggesting it happen in Paris. Any spiritual elders, wisdom people out there that want to take part, please get involved. Contact me, and together we can suggest to these political leaders that enough is enough. They've got to bury the hatchet. I'm only going to mediate the religious side of it between the Muslim, Christian, Jewish, and other traditions. I'm not going to touch the politics, but if we can clear that religious stuff up, which I believe we can, that will open the path to political settlements, which I want long term, 2 states, Palestinian, Israeli, living in harmony, Christians, Muslims and Jews living in harmony. That's got to happen through the power of the goddess of peace. So there we are, that's what I've been up to. And I think